Thanks everybody for coming to my talk on the late Qing Dynasty. We are on the fifth of the 9 installment series on the late Qing. Just to give you a brief summary again, the 9 installments go something like this: from 1840 to 1911. So the first one is the First Opium War between China and Britain. Obviously, China lost, and that's when Hong Kong was ceded to Britain, and opium was legalized in the empire. And then the Second Opium War, which lasted from 1856 to 1860. That's when the French and the British invaded China again, wanting to add on to more demands on the original treaties, which led to the burning of the Summer Palace, and also the emperor fleeing Beijing and dying in Rehe. And the third installment was the Taiping Rebellion, which happened from 1850 to 1864, where this guy who repeatedly failed in the public examination system dreamt that he was the younger brother of Jesus and the second son of God, and led to a rebellion that lasted for 14 years and 17 million deaths, which, just to put it on scale, is somewhere around 10 Hong Kongs. And then the fourth one was the modernization period, which was our last talk, and that was the period, a relative peace from 1864 to 1894, 30 years. It's a great way to look at a summary of modern Chinese history from 1840 to 1949, and I've talked about it repeatedly. Which is, you can think of that as one day with 3 meals, and the foreigners came into China for a meal. So the breakfast was the First Opium War, the Second Opium War, and you signed the Beijing Treaty, Nanjing Treaty, whatever. And then, so at that point, they were digesting the benefits from all these treaties, and so there was relative peace from 1860 to 1894. 1894. Today we'll be talking about the Sino-Japanese War. The Sino-Japanese War and the Boxer Rebellion, which happened in 1900, but you could think of it as lunch. And so from lunch onwards, they took more from China, and then they were digesting. And then the dinner would be the biggest of all, which would be the Sino-Japanese War in 1937 to 1945. So you think of Chinese history as kind of like war with foreign enemies, a period of peace, war again, period of peace, war again, and then the People's Republic of China. So today we are going to be talking about the 5th installment, which is the Sino-Japanese War, which, objectively speaking, is probably one of the most important events in Chinese history. But a disclaimer is that I read most of all these documents in Chinese, on the Chinese side. So I'm actually basically giving you the Chinese side of the story in English. So it's just a disclaimer. I'm sure if you listen to someone in English again, but if it was Japanese, it would be very, very different. But the Sino-Japanese War, one of the greatest academics, one of the greatest thinkers in Chinese history in modern era, is a guy called Liang Qichao. He said, the Sino-Japanese War, when China lost to Japan, is the moment when China woke up from the dream of grandeur that lasted for 3,000 years. This is the moment when China realized, heck, we are not really in the middle of the universe, because it was just to recall, modernization period after the Chinese lost to the French and the British, that they signed these treaties with Britain and Britain and France, and then they realized at the same time that they're substantially inferior in terms of military technology. And then when they were fighting the Taiping rebellions, they were using Western technology against the Chinese peasants. Then they realized, or certain people, as we last talked about, there were certain people who were part of the putting down of the rebellion. Some of the Han Chinese in the south decided that it's actually important to modernize. The Chinese system is still the best, but Western technology, especially artillery, are superior. So the system stays Chinese, but the technology we use the Western. So that's the modernization period. And so in the first topic I'm going to talk about is the modern Navy, because that is the center of the war between Japan and China that happened in 1894. And what's interesting about this war is that the aftermath is still with us. There's a certain technical detail between during the war and then during the signing of the treaty afterwards that led to the dispute of the Diaoyu Islands, and I'll get to that later. But in the beginning, so let's talk about the Navy. And Navy, I have to, as usual, do the map of China. That's China. Today I have to draw Japan now because it's... So in the modernization period, one of the biggest things, or after the Opium War, one of the biggest realizations is that for 3,000 years in Chinese history, there's only one line of defense that matters, and it's this line. This line is, you could probably can tell it's the Great War, but it's also coincidentally, this line also draws the difference between the 15 inches of rainfall per year. So anything, and I've talked about this repeatedly. Actually, I talk about this all the time in pretty much all topics because this is probably the most important line. This is the line where south of it, there's more than 15 inches or 400 centimeters of rain per year and less. So south of this, it's appropriate for farming. North of that, they can't farm. So that's also the line between so-called the Han agricultural civilization. And then north of that, it's probably the Hun or the Mongolian, or you call them barbarians or nomads. This is also the line of the Great War. It's also called the Sima Qian line. Sima Qian is the first serious historian in Chinese history. And so for many, many, many years, this is the line that the Chinese emperors have to defend if they want the stability of the empire. The First Opium War completely broke this belief, this belief, because actually people can attack from the coast. So, and China has a really long coastline, and so one of the events that led to the building of the modern navy in China was in 1874. Last time I talked about it, where in 1868 there was the Meiji Restoration, and then Japan began to modernize. And if you look at Japanese history, every single time that Japan modernizes or become one coherent country, they tend to invade because there's not enough natural resources. If you look at the beginning of the Restoration, the amount, and they were building capitalism, the amount of copper or steel or oil that's necessary for the market to function, whatever domestic supply was only 0.2% of the demand. So there wasn't enough, so they had to go out. So there's this one time, the first time there was a coherent kingdom was in the Qing Dynasty in the 6th century. They invaded the 6th, 7th century. They invaded Korea once. In Hideyoshi, united Japan again in the 1590s, so they invaded Korea again. So in 1868, when Japan became one coherent empire, they needed to expand their sphere of influence. And the first place they went to was Okinawa. And in Okinawa, which was originally a vassal state of China, but the vassal state of China, the person that we talked the most about was the Beiyang official, Li Hongzhang, didn't want to get into any kind of conflict. So he just kind of let Okinawa to become Japan. And then a few Okinawans then were floating down to Taiwan, and they were killed by the Taiwanese. And so the Japanese used that as an excuse to invade Taiwan in 1874. And but the military, they were pretty weak then, so actually the Chinese fought them off. But from there, China realized that they need to build their own navy. So that's when Li Hongzhang, who was in the Beiyang, started telling the Empress Dowager that we have to build a navy. And because of the long coastline, there should be 3 navies. The one called Beiyang. Bei just means north. Yang means ocean. So, which would protect Beijing. And then there'd be Nanyang. Nan would be means south. That protects the Shanghai area. And then the Minyue, which protects the Fujian and the Guangdong area. So 3. But Beiyang obviously is the most important because that's where they protect the capital. And so they started, so the best thing to do is, they actually in 1866, prior to 1874, they started building a school and also a shipyard down in Fujian. Fujian, obviously, it's because it's clear at the coastline. It's a lot of Southeast Chinese, actually, even today, so there's a lot of foreign influence. So they built a shipyard, and then they also started a school that they were producing their own professionals, both in terms of shipbuilding and also captains. And so 1874, what they started doing was they started buying, because the quality that the shipyard was producing was not up to par. So they in 1881, Li Hongzhang got one of his official, Ding Ruchang, to go to England to buy ships. So they bought two, and then they drove them back. Chao Yong Yang Wei. What's really interesting is if you look at the fleet in Japan, you find that Japan has a few ships that look exactly like those two. Because England at the time, or even Germany at the time, it's a little bit like a casino operator, right? Like in the Far East, I'll sell the Chinese the ships, and I'll also sell you the Japanese the ships. And then basically if one day they would fight, it doesn't really matter, as long as, it's a bit like, the 1980s Iran and Iraq kind of situation with America. So just kept on buying and buying. They put a lot of money in. They realized that it's very important to have the coastal defense. In 1884, last time I talked about, France invaded China because they wanted to take Vietnam. And when that happened, it took about an hour for them to destroy the whole of the Fujian fleet and also the shipyard. And so from then on, China realized they had to keep on going, so they kept on buying, and then they also sent some of the kids who were studying in Fujian to go to the Royal Navy School in Greenwich. So a few of them came back with degrees at the Royal Navy School, and pretty much exactly trained in an exactly rigorous manner as anyone from the Royal Navy.
Were those ships steam powered?
Steam powered. So these are all steam powered by now.
Steel.
Yes, because you can think about it, in the 1880s and 1890s, the shipbuilding, especially in warfare, was kind of like the smartphones of today. There's like a huge arms race. So every 2 years or 3 years, you would have something that is substantially more technologically advanced. And so when they were building, and then they were buying, and so by 1888, with all the buying and of training and all the money that's been put in, actually the whole of China had tonnage, the whole fleet, a tonnage of 85,000 tons. 85,000 tons, and the Beiyang had 70 of the 85. And the 70, you put everything in context. The magazine, and obviously at that time, the way to measure how strong a navy is by total tonnage. And so at 70,000, the Beiyang fleet, just the Beiyang fleet within the Chinese Navy system, was ranked number 8. Japan was not ranked anywhere at all. And even America was 12. So America that was after the Civil War, so they didn't want to invest anything into the military, right? So that was that period in the 1880s, 1890s. And so, so they were well educated. They had, and the salaries actually compared to the same level as like the Royal Navy in Britain, actually the Chinese Navy officers were actually more well paid. And so when in 1888, when they created the whole Beiyang fleet, they actually had two bases, one in Lushun in Dalian, the other one is in Weihai. Weihai is where our chief executive, C.Y. Leung, that's where he's from. So Weihai Wei, in an island called Liu Gong Island. And Liu Gong Island, so what's interesting, and then also true to us Chinese nature, is like when all these guys are so well paid, that was also the highest concentration of brothels and casinos of the whole country. So Beiyang, that's so everything looks good, it feels great, and then actually there were a lot of foreign advisors to help as well. One of them is called William Lang, and so William Lang he was really strict, and most of the people, and that's why at that point in time the discipline was really high. And then just like everything else in Chinese history, there's always when I talk about all the positive stuff, there's always a but. But what's Beiyang? There's a slight problem that was brewing. First of all, it's personnel. So obviously, the Qing Dynasty, the Manchu, and then basically the officials are either Manchu or they're Han. Han would be the most Chinese. And within the Han, they're also the so-called, talk about the modernizing officials, including Li Hongzhang, the Beiyang official and the viceroy of what is now Hebei and Beijing and Tianjin. And then there's also the traditional or conservative, and I'll talk about this Wang person. And so obviously in the navy, when they're building the navy, it's really about the Han branch of the modernizing branch led by Li, who himself is from Anhui, okay, or Huai. So when they built the whole navy, all the students were actually from Fujian. And actually, all the kids who went to England had to be from Fujian. One of the generals called Deng Shichang, he was actually one of the best students in the school. He was slightly older. He was fluent in English. But because he's from Canton, he was not allowed to go to England to study, because it was the Fujian government that was paying. So the Fujian government would not pay for a Cantonese boy to go to spend so much money and study. So you can think of how regional at that point in time. And part of it is actually language. I think one of the greatest things that has happened in China, or the worst things, depending on how you look at it, is that everybody must speak Mandarin in China. So that really helps with population flow and patriotism. And so when Li was creating the whole navy, all the know-how, all the captains were actually Fujianese. But because Li himself is from Anhui or Huai, there's another word for Huai, he would not let these captains, these Fujian captains, become the head. So he put someone who is from the army as the head, called Ding. And so all these Fujianese captains were not happy. I mean, it's because they obviously knew that Ding knew very little about how to be a naval captain or an admiral. But so we have this issue going on. And then there's also William Lang, who was British. And then there was something that happened in 1890 when the Beiyang fleet, because it was very cold, they went, of all places, went to Hong Kong as like R&R. Ding left the boat. And when so Lang was still there. The number one fleet ship is called Ding Yuan. That the captain is called Liu. Liu then changed the flag from a admiral flag to a captain flag. William Lang was not happy. He was like, "Wait, hold on a sec. I'm still here. I'm the admiral. I'm the vice admiral." And Liu was like, "No, you're not. You're foreign. You're just here to as show." Lang then complained to Li. Li confirmed what Liu said and said, Liu was right. You are just actually here for show. So William Lang left the Navy, and then from then on, actually, the British support for the Beiyang fleet then collapsed, because they thought it's like, because of this, you've just insulted one of the key characters that were put into your fleet. Obviously, from Li's perspective, it's always very difficult. Do you give a lot of authority to someone who is from another country, especially if this is the most important? If this is one of the most important military machines that you have, versus Japan. Japan actually were treating the British admirals really well. So during the actual war in 1894, most of the fleet actually had British consultants, which obviously then led to an improved, that's why the quality is better. Li then put a few German guys into the fleet who were from the army. So they didn't do anything much other than building a lot of cannons, artillery, land artillery around the ports to support the fleet.
What was it? I'm sorry. It was
Yep.
the European alliance here with Germany and Britain.
Yeah.
Does that come about because of the ports that were open after the Second Opium War? Is that why they were willing to offer their support and assistance and.
Yeah, and they're good customers, right? Like because for example, one ding yuan costs about 1.5 million taels of silver, right? So in this case, ding yuan and zhen yuan, they're both 7,000 tons. So they're two 7,000-ton ships, which at the time they're kind of like they're like aircraft carriers. But what's interesting about the Chinese mentality from here is the Chinese actually bought a lot of big ships that move very slowly, which is disadvantaged. But from China's perspective, and you can tell from their mentality, they basically just want to create a Chinese Great War, like a naval Great War. So one of the you remember from the first Opium War, the person who destroyed all the opium, like a national hero, is called Lin Zexu. Lin Zexu actually bought a British or Western steam-engined ship, a warship, to fight the British. But what he did was he just parked it at the port and used it as a fort.